The original Breath of Fire on Super Nintendo is one of those games that just feels like a classic JRPG. You've got bright, almost anime-style sprites, a blue-haired protagonist who can literally turn into a dragon, and a very straightforward setup. Bad guy destroys your village, so yeah, it's time to do something about it. There's fishing that gives you some of the best items in the game, an absolutely wild number of random encounters, and more than a few moments where the game just kinda shrugs and says, hey, good luck figuring this out, pal. And honestly, that's part of the charm, even now more than 30 years later. But this time, I didn't want to play the Super Nintendo version, I wanted something a little different. So instead, I played the Game Boy Advance version, to see what actually changed and whether those changes made the game better or worse. Now, I never owned this game as a kid, but I remember making several trips to the local game rental store, each time hoping that someone was nice enough to leave my save file on the cartridge so I could continue from where I left off. It's interesting how times change, and what used to seem like normal grinding and game progression now seems like a slog at times because of all the creature comforts we have in modern games. Either that, or maybe I'm just getting more impatient with every decade that I still game. At least this time around, I don't have to walk around the entire game, which leads me to one of the very first things that I noticed. Now my characters are all about that power walk life.
Accelerated walking.
But seriously, it was really cool to see that this port, which came out in 2001 and somehow has eluded my attention for 25 years, gave Ryu and company auto dash by default. The original version was painstakingly slow, and when I booted this game up and started walking, I actually yelled out, "Go Capcom!" out loud. Some dungeons with puzzle or backtrack mechanics were pretty annoying back in the day, mostly because the encounter rate was so high. While it didn't feel like the encounter rate was adjusted anywhere, I also never had that feeling that some of you might remember where you get frustrated and say out loud, "I'm so over this place, and I'm pretty sure I'm never gonna get the f*** out of here." Hell, I may have even said this on a live stream playthrough I did several years ago, which you can watch here on the channel.
I cannot find I cannot ascertain what my ass and what my elbow is in this maze. Like, this dungeon is actually very small and very simple, but every time I do it, I find myself walking around for 45 minutes.
Another difference I noticed right off the bat was the color saturation of the graphics. If you ever owned a Game Boy Advance or even played a GBA game, you'll know what I'm talking about. The console is well known for what I would call color maxing, where some of the soft tones you might find in the Super Nintendo version aren't here just because the color saturation of the Game Boy Advance is so high. Every color is very in your face, and the first things that I thought of were a twister board or an original set of Legos where every color is completely saturated. I definitely prefer the softer tones and overall graphical presentation of the Super Nintendo version, though I was happy to see some of the influences taken from Breath of Fire 4, which was released a few months before this game. In battle, instead of 4 white boxes on the bottom of the screen for each character, we now have anime-style portraits like Breath of Fire 4. Sitting them on top of each other here, it should be pretty obvious to see the similarity. This also applies to the party menu, where the portraits have been updated to match the same style. Finally, Capcom also added some anime-like animations at certain points in the game that were not in the original. Speaking of the menu, one of the greatest quality of life improvements is that now there's an information bar telling you what each item in your inventory does. In the Super Nintendo days, I couldn't have told you what half of my shit in the inventory did, so it was nice to see that most of them were useless and I could sell or discard them. Outside of the Earth Key, the Rod 5, Cure, Acorn, Life, and some unique pieces of equipment, there's not much you need other than quest-related items. And man, will you really use that Earth Key a lot. Now, one other change made in this version that I didn't really notice until I researched after is the increased gold and experience from battles. Even with the auto dash, increased battle spoils, and me mostly remembering how to beat the game, this game still felt pretty damn grindy. Let me know in the comments below your thoughts between the two versions if you've tried both. Now, probably the biggest downgrade in this version is the audio. It's well known that when making the Game Boy Advance, Nintendo didn't even add an audio jack to the console, let alone invest in developing the raw hardware audio capabilities. The result for Breath of Fire is a highly compressed and metallic sounding score. I can talk about it all day, but it's just way easier to play a comparison example and let it speak for itself. At the end of the day, it's really kind of like Super Nintendo music on the NES, isn't it? That pretty much covers all the differences between the versions, so now I can just talk in general terms about everything else. Capcom knew when they made Breath of Fire that they wanted it to be a series, and the first entry here, while paper thin on the story, sets the stage for the trilogy to come. Spoilers incoming. This game is all about light versus dark dragons, and the conflict between the two being manipulated by a higher power. That higher power is the goddess Myria, who goes by the name Tyr in this game. While very scarce in number during the game, history says light dragons were once very powerful and locked Myria away using 6 magic keys. As light dragons during this game are limited to very few due to conflicts with the dark dragons, the dark dragon general Jade seizes the opportunity to wipe out their town of Drogon by burning it. During this conflict, Jade is met by the most powerful light dragon, Sarah, who despite a valiant effort cannot defeat Jade and is completely captured by him. Prior to this, however, Sarah temporarily petrified all of the light dragons to save them from the fire. When Ryu escapes petrification after the fire, he sets out on a journey to find Sarah and stop Dark Dragon Emperor Zog from finding the 6 keys and waking Myria. Along the way, Ryu recruits 7 other characters to help him, each with their own unique abilities that help you navigate the puzzles and obstacles of the game. By far the coolest is Karn, who learns abilities that allow him to fuse with other party members to form 4 different, highly overpowered, and might I add, completely ridiculous looking versions. There are hidden doors around the world for Karn to open, dig sites defined for the character Mogu, places you can only reach with Nina's bird form, wells that Ryu can fish treasure from, large heavy items that Ox and Karn can move, and an underwater fish form for Gobi. As the game progresses, Ryu also has the ability to visit 4 different dragon shrines to gain more dragon powers to transform into, the last of which is required for the best ending in the game and is absolutely the most overpowered ability in the game, the second being Karn's final transformation. If you haven't played the game before, it literally never tells you where any of the items are that you need to enter the shrines, so it's up to you to search the entire world. Unless, of course, you want to use the internet, which most people didn't have when this game was released. Progression in the game is pretty linear, however, most of the time the game doesn't tell you what to do. In Auria, for example, you need to get a gold bar to move forward, but the game doesn't tell you how to get it, other than offering it at a crazy price tag in the item shop. Later down the line, you'll even need a second gold bar. At another point, you'll only have a single weak character and have to travel to an underwater town without knowing its direction and having random encounters you simply can't win. The pre-internet way to finish this game is literally to talk to every single person and visit every inch of the map. A great example is a necessary quest toward the end where you have to exchange letters between 2 weapon enthusiasts who live on different islands of the world, and the game really never tells you to do so. There are some other real head scratchers in the game when it comes to random battles. In some areas you might have 3 random encounter enemies that feel scaled to your level and ability, but then there's one that has the ability to wipe your party but actually yields less experience and gold than the easier ones. One example of this is the neon yellow Bulla enemy in the L&D cave on the way to Bleak. Bullas are enemies that you'll see from the very beginning of the game and are very much physical attackers, so when you run into this yellow variety you think, well, I'll just hit auto battle again like all the others. But for whatever reason, this Bulla has a lightning spell that hits the entire party for 90 hit points, which is most of, if not all of each character's maximum health at that point in the game. Not to mention, these things can come in pairs and really don't give much experience. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me, but I guess they made up for it because after you get out of the L&D cave, you can fight gold slimes on the world map for massive experience, far beyond what other enemies could give. Speaking of combat, Breath of Fire has a generally very simple combat system. Battles are random and plentiful, sometimes almost to the detriment of the game. Ryu and crew can attack, change from the front to back row, use a spell or ability, or use an item. There's also an auto battle feature, which you'll probably find yourself using 90% of the time if you play like I do. There's also an option to run, but I found that running from enemies fails most of the time until you're much stronger than they are, so it's best to just do the battle. Later in the game, you can get a spell, however, that lets you leave random battles. One battle dynamic is that magic and abilities far outshine physical attacks, with the exception of Karn's transformations, though technically that's also an ability. I found magic to do mostly static damage based on the spell, not the enemy. Toward the end of the game, Blue's magic, Karn's transformations, and Ryu's dragon forms will be doing most of the damage. Physical attacks are really just for random auto battles in my opinion, and it also helps to equip Ryu with one of the boomerang weapons, as they do hit all enemies. Boss battles in Breath of Fire really serve as more of a stat and equipment check more than anything else. While a couple bosses like Mothro have a unique gimmick, most of the bosses are just tank, spank, and heal. One unique thing about bosses in the game is that after you drain their health bar, they have a get back up mechanic, which is really just another health bar that you can't see. Some of these are very short, and some far exceed the original health bar. While not used nearly as much in modern games, one category not to sleep on here is items. I'm not even sure if this game can be finished without restorative items or not, though I'm sure someone on YouTube has probably tried. As previously mentioned, you find an item called the Earth Key that deals 30 damage to every enemy on the screen. While not so useful in the last 25% of the game, this thing is beyond useful for Nina. Nina's base attack is really poor, and when she doesn't need to heal, the Earth Key serves as her primary damage dealer. Also having herbs, acorns, lives, and cures in the inventory is a must, especially during times where the character is solo, like Ryu training in the Dragon Shrine or even the last battle against the goddess. Now, I wouldn't say that Breath of Fire is necessarily a hard game, but I would say that completing it doesn't really come with very many options on how to do so. It's very important that you get all of the dragon forms. It's very important that you get all of Karn's transformations. Why? Because they're extremely overpowered, and at certain times you need to be overpowered, especially late in the game. I suppose it might be fun to try and beat Miria without these forms, but I personally have no desire to intentionally nerf myself. The final party to have is Ryu, Nina, Blue, and Karn's Puka transformation, or Puka transformation, or however you're supposed to say that. In case you do run into trouble though, there are dragon save shrines in each town, and a few scattered throughout the world to save your progress, as expected in a game like this. The Game Boy Advance version does come with a new quality of life feature that I never personally used that lets you do a quick save. Also, there is no post-game save data here or anything like that, which does limit replayability in my opinion. Once you've finished and gotten everything, there's very little reason to come back unless it's like a decade later or something. In summary, I think this version of the game is one to play if you're a grizzled vet looking for a trip down memory lane, because it will let you down the lane much faster than the original. However, if you're new to the game or series, you should start with the original. The graphics there are smoother and less intense, the music isn't muffled and metallic sounding, and you get to see the game as it was originally intended. This does come with slower pacing and some annoyances the GBA version fixed, but it's the definitive version. I don't think that the Game Boy Advance version is bad by any means, but I think it's hindered by hardware limitations, even though the character portraits and faster pacing are great changes. I'm giving Breath of Fire on Game Boy Advance a 7.5, and I would recommend it to series veterans looking for another trip through the original. Either version you play, the series is great, though lost to modern times, and it's important to play the first 3 games in order as they are all part of the same story. I will say though, if you are someone who hates random encounters, Breath of Fire might not be your cup of tea. Thank you so much for watching the video, and everyone that has subscribed to the channel. If you enjoyed the content, please consider subscribing, liking, or leaving a comment. It's free and it means a lot. Please look forward to more content soon, and I'll see you in the next video.